Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at two communication revolutions, the telephone and the movies.
And how they took such wildly different paths.
It's wild, right? One, the telephone, gets super tightly controlled, almost a monopoly.
And the other, film, just explodes. Creativity and competition everywhere.
That's what we're going to try and figure out today, the WHY behind those different directions.
It's not just about the tech, though, is it? It's power, it's control, it's how innovation gets, well, sometimes it gets nurtured, sometimes stifled.
Okay, so the telephone. Late 1800s, we've all got that image of Alexander Graham Bell, right? Lone genius, toiling away.
Classic story. But the reality is more complex. This idea of simultaneous discovery is key here.
Simultaneous discovery.
Yeah, Bell wasn't alone in going after this tech. Elisha Gray, for example, filed a patent for a very similar device, like the same day as Bell.
Wow, no kidding.
And then there's Johann Philipp Race. Even earlier, he was messing around with voice transmission stuff. And this guy, Daniel Drawbaugh, claimed HE invented the phone years before Bell.
So it wasn't just one aha moment, more like a race to the finish line.
You got it. And Bell's position is interesting. He's close enough to the telegraph industry to see the need for better communication, but not so close that those big guys saw him as a threat right away, like Western Union.
So he wasn't squashed by the establishment right off the bat.
Nope. And get this, Western Union, they were so focused on the 1876 election. They wanted Rutherford B. Hayes to win, and they controlled so much communication.
They were playing kingmaker.
Totally. And because of that, they missed how big the telephone could be. But then, the Kronos effect.
Kronos effect.
It's like, imagine this titan eating its own children to stay in power. That's what Western Union tried to do to Bell's company.
Intense?
Yeah, they realized they messed up and wanted to crush Bell before he got big.
So how'd he survive? It sounded like he was in a tight spot.
He was. Almost sold his patents for like $100,000. Imagine that.
World would be different, huh? But he didn't sell. What happened?
Well, Bell sued Western Union over the patent. And then, pure luck. This financier, Jay Gould, goes after Western Union, tries to take them over.
Hostile takeover, right.
Exactly. So Western Union, they're fighting for their lives, had to settle with Bell so they could deal with Gould.
So it wasn't just the invention. It was legal savvy chew-in-D luck.
Right. And that's a lesson for anyone who's into innovation. It's not just the tech. It's business smarts, it's timing. Sometimes it's just plain luck.
Never a straight line to success.
Definitely not. But even after beating Western Union, Bell, he had this bigger idea, a universal regulated phone system. And he was ready to play rough to get it.
So the start of the Bell Empire?
You could say that. This is where Theodore Vail comes in, Bell's successor. He shared that big vision. But it wasn't easy. Independent phone companies started popping up, challenging Bell.
Underdogs going up against the giant.
Totally. These independents, a lot of them in rural areas, they wanted local control, not some big company calling all the shots. So they built their own networks.
What did Bell do about that?
Oh, they weren't happy. Under Vail, they did all sorts of things to mess with the independents, like undercutting their prices, even sabotage.
Sabotage.
Telephone poles knocked over, wires cut, equipment set on fire. It was a war.
A far cry from the inventor in his workshop.
Yeah. Makes you think, though. How much ruthlessness does it take to make a new technology really take off? It's a question worth thinking about.
It definitely has a new dimension to the story.
And then it gets even more complicated. J.P. Morgan, the big financier, comes onto the scene. He sees the potential for a full-on telephone monopoly and backs Vail's plan.
So even back then, big money was shaping tech.
Oh, absolutely. And to solidify their position, to deal with these antitrust concerns that were starting to come up, Bell made a deal with the government, the Kingsbury Commitment.
I've heard of that, but honestly not sure I know the details. What was the deal?
Well, on the surface, it looked like a compromise. Bell agreed to some government oversight. In exchange, they got to stay on top. But a lot of people say that the Kingsbury Commitment, even though it seemed to be about competition, actually ended up stifling it. It made Bell the undisputed king of the phone world, and that had repercussions for decades.
So what does all this mean for us today? How does that legacy affect how we use the phone now?
That's the big question. Think about it. How many choices do we really have when it comes to phone service? How has the lack of competition back then affected prices, affected innovation? These are the echoes of those early battles that went way beyond just technology. They were about who got to control communication itself, who got to change how information flowed in a world that was rapidly changing. Wild, right? How the telephone just became more and more controlled.
It makes you think about how much power those early decisions still have today.
Absolutely. But while the telephone was getting locked down, something completely different was happening with movies. Early cinema, it was chaotic. Wild west of innovation. The fight for control was way more complicated.
Total opposite of the telephone, huh? No one company running the show, just a bunch of players pushing and pulling, trying to figure out this whole new thing. Technology, art, business, all mixed up.
Exactly. And as we look at the sources, it's all about that battle. The people who wanted to control cinema versus the ones who wanted it to be open, creative.
Okay, so early 1900s. Movies are just starting, but they weren't exactly high art, right?
Not really.
Yeah.
More like a novelty. Cheap entertainment. Shown in those cramped Nickelodeons. Imagine. Smoky room, flickering images, all kinds of sounds. Not always the nicest smells.
Not the glamorous Hollywood we think of.
Nope. But even then, some people saw potential for something more.
Like Adolf Zukor. I read about him. He thought movies could be art.
Ambitious guy. An immigrant. He was willing to gamble, push the boundaries. He didn't think movies were just a fad.
Queen Elizabeth, that film. That was a big gamble for him.
Huge. Starring Sarah Bernhardt, the famous French actress. So different from those short, simple films everyone was making.
Who paid a ton for the rights to show it in America. Figured it would make people want more sophisticated films. But he had a problem, didn't he? The Edison Trust.
Ah, yes. The Edison Trust. They basically wanted to run the whole American film industry, use their patents to control everything. How long films could be, they even stopped actors from getting famous.
No stars, no fancy credits. Just make them quick and cheap, make money. Like a factory churning out entertainment.
Pretty much. But you can't control creativity forever. Someone was going to rebel.
And that someone was Carl Laemmle, right? Another immigrant who hated what the trust was doing.
Laemmle was interesting. A businessman, but he really cared about art. He thought movies could be more than just a way to make a buck.
His plan to take on the trust was pretty crazy, wasn't it? Promising films to anyone who joined him, even though he didn't really know how he'd get them.
Risky move. Imagine standing up to the Edison Trust with nothing but belief in movies and the idea that things could be better.
Gutsy. How'd he pull it off? The trust wasn't gonna just let him win.
They fought back hard, sued him like 289 times in 3 years, tried to crush his rebellion before it even got started.
289 lawsuits. You gotta admire the persistence.
Laemmle and the other independents, they just kept going. They knew quality was important, longer films, better stories, talented actors, and they got Wall Street to invest in them, something the trust was too old-fashioned to do.
That's so different from the telephone, right? Film rebels got funding, telephone rebels got shut down.
It's the nature of the industries, I think. Film, it appealed to everyone. People were ready to invest in new entertainment.
So while Laemmle's fighting the trust, what about Zukor? Where was he in all this?
Oh, Zukor was never one to sit things out. He saw how a more organized, efficient film industry could work. He wanted to build an empire.
He was all about vertical integration, right? Controlling the whole process, making the films, distributing them, showing them in theaters.
Exactly. He saw how streamlined it could be. One person in charge of everything. But not everyone agreed with him. W. Hodgkinson, the guy who founded Paramount Pictures, he thought things should be more open, more collaborative.
So it was a battle of ideas, too. Zukor's studio system versus Hodgkinson's more open approach.
And Zukor, he was a fighter. Got rid of Hodgkinson and started doing things his way. Introduced things like block booking to control the industry even more.
Block booking? That was pretty controversial, right? Theaters had to buy a whole year's worth of films, sight unseen, just to get the big hits.
Smart business, yeah, but it made people mad. Theater owners didn't like being forced to buy films they didn't want. And that's how First National got started. A rival studio formed by the theater owners themselves to fight back against Zukor.
And they even stole Zukor's biggest stars. Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, offered them these huge contracts, more creative control, more money. Zukor must have been furious.
It was a big blow, for sure. But Zukor always had a plan. Sold a bunch of stock, got a ton of money, and started buying theaters like crazy. Consolidated his power even more.
Turned the rebellion into a way to get stronger. Pretty savvy.
Zukor understood how the game worked. Size mattered. Controlling how films were made and distributed. But here's the thing. Block booking, it helped Zukor, but it also had a similar effect to what Bell did with the telephone. Less choice, and it squeezed out the smaller filmmakers.
So both industries ended up with the same problem. Too much power in the hands of a few, less competition, less diversity.
It's a pattern, isn't it? The desire for control, for being on top, it often stifles creativity and innovation. Makes you wonder, how much choice do we really have as consumers? How many amazing films, how many amazing inventions never see the light of day because they don't fit the mold?
Makes you think, right? What about other tech, like radio? Did that get controlled the same way?
That's a great question. And it's actually perfect timing because that's exactly where your sources take us next. The early days of radio and, yeah, as another battle for control. This time, it was AT&T versus RCA, the Radio Corporation of America.
So we're going from screens to sound waves. What was at stake this time?
Oh, everything. Radio, it could reach everybody. News, entertainment, instantly across the whole country. It was huge.
And with all their phone lines, AT&T, they were in a good position to take over, weren't they?
For sure. Those long-distance lines, perfect for carrying radio programs, it was a natural next step for them.
So they could control the flow of information again, just like with the telephone?
Yep. And they saw it pretty quickly. The idea of a broadcast network. You could pool resources, make better shows, reach way more people.
It's the model we still use today.
It is. But AT&T's real genius, at least from a business standpoint, was advertising. Bringing ads to radio.
That changed everything.
Totally. Before that, it was all about selling radio sets.
Mm-hmm.
But advertising, that opened up a whole new world. Now, the product wasn't the show itself, it was the audience. Sell their attention to advertisers.
So the whole focus shifted.
Before ads, more broadcasters was good. More people buying radios. But with ads, it became a competition. Everyone wanted the biggest audience to get the most money.
So instead of working together, it's a fight.
Right? And AT&T, they were smart. At first, they didn't make a big deal about the advertising. Just said they were a common carrier. Anyone could pay to broadcast their message.
Yeah.
Kind of testing the waters.
Janky.
But it worked. They eventually went all in on ads, sponsors, jingles, the whole thing. And they had the money to do it right.
Yeah.
Hire the best people, make the best shows, get the biggest audience.
Entertainment as a way to sell stuff.
Exactly. A model that would go on to shape TV, too.
Right.
But while all this was happening, someone else was coming up. RCA.
RCA, right. The government actually helped create them, didn't they, to compete with AT&T?
Yeah, kind of a national champion for radio. It was a clash of the titans. But RCA had a problem. They didn't have AT&T's network.
So they were kind of stuck, like those independent telephone companies.
But their leader, David Sarnoff, he was a smart guy. He realized, okay, we can't beat AT&T's network, but we can control the other end, the radios themselves.
So he changed the whole game.
He did. He figured if RCA could control the technology people used to listen, they could control what they heard, even without owning the network. Brilliant.
Innovation beating the big guys.
Yeah, exactly. Sarnoff got deals with the big radio manufacturers to use RCA tech, and then he made his own network, NBC, by connecting independent stations. A bold move, but it paid off.
So AT&T couldn't control radio completely. They had competition, which actually probably helped radio grow.
It shows how even the biggest companies can be challenged. The tech landscape is always changing. No one stays on top forever.
So from telephones to movies to radio, it's the same story. This back and forth between being open and being controlled, between making money and making something new.
It's a reminder that technology is never just technology. It's about power, it's about money, it's about choices. And if we want tech to work for everyone, we have to understand those forces.
Well, that's about all the time we have for our deep dive today. We've gone from Bell's attic to Hollywood to the birth of radio. It's incredible how much these early battles still affect us today.
They do. It's a reminder that the choices we make about technology, they have consequences. They shape how we communicate, how we see the world, how we understand each other. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep thinking critically about the tech that shapes our lives.